All right, we're going to call the Scott County WMO Watershed Planning Commission February 24th, 25 meeting to order. First order of business is the approval of the agenda.
Motion.
Go ahead.
Brian Clayton Wagner here. I'll move to approve.
We have a motion. We need a second.
Jay Fredericks, I second it.
Thank you, commissioners. I will do roll. Commissioner Schmidt,
Aye.
Commissioner Phillips,
Aye.
Commissioner Wagner,
Aye.
and Commissioner Fredericks. Ooh, we had him. There you go. Commissioner Fredericks. Did I get you? Oh, there you are. Sorry, my audio might have bounced out there for just a second. Thank you, commissioners.
All right, I think next on the agenda was for the commissioners to have some time for an intro and get to know each other a little bit. I guess I'll start off. My name is Brian Schmidt, and I've been on the commission. I'm not even sure, but it's got to be 8-9 years, something like that. Maybe Ryan knows right off, but anyway, I've been on a while. I just personal history for my work. I've been working for Lester Building Systems for 37 years. I've been on the town board, which is a major interest for me, and I've been on the town board in Blakely Township since 1995. So 30 years coming up. And as far as the commission, I got interested in that because nobody had been representing. So, like I say, I got on that many years ago, and I've been on ever since. So, I guess next.
I can go.
Sure.
All right. Clayton Wagner. I am pretty new. This is only my second meeting. I grew up in Belle Plaine, and now I live out in Webster, Minnesota. So I'm part of the watershed. Got involved because natural resources and conservation is an interest to me, an area of interest to me, and making sure it is our natural resources are protected and it is equitable for those who use it and those who need it. So I'm a family medicine physician through Health Partners, practicing all around the Twin Cities for urgent care, and then my home clinic is in Apple Valley. Yeah, have a wife and 3 kids, so that's me.
Thanks, Clayton. Anybody or whoever's next wants to speak up, go ahead.
I can go. So my name is Jay Fredericks. This is also my second meeting. I'm relatively new to Scott County. We moved here about 1.5 years ago. We spent about 26 years in Lakeville before that. I spent most of my career in IT, worked for Northwest and then Delta, and then Caesars Entertainment, worked recently for an ed tech company. At the end of the year, I kind of decided to semi-retire. I'm still doing some IT consulting and was just looking for a way to get involved in something that I haven't had time to do in my past with my career obligations, and followed an ad in like a Scott County newspaper that said if you're interested. And so I kind of submitted, and after some back and forth, they asked me if I wanted to be on the watershed representing Credit River, which is where we live. I don't have any experience in this space, but I grew up in Colorado and have spent a lot of time in outdoors and things like that. And so I thought it would be a good opportunity, and hopefully I can do my job here and add some value along the way.
Thank you. Next.
Perhaps Commissioner Phillips?
Oh, hey, everybody. Thanks. I'm just joining from my telephone here. He's picking my child up at the bus stop. But yeah, hi, everyone. I'm Commissioner Phillips. My name is Bill Phillips. Good to meet everybody, especially welcome to the new commissioners. I'm relatively new as well. Started a year ago, January. I think I'm in my second year now. Yeah, so I live up in Savage. I'm kind of in the northeast portion. I'm a at-large member, northeast portion of the watershed, kind of right at the edge. I'm at the just kind of the northern edge of it. By trade, I'm an septic inspector by trade, advanced septic inspector. I work for Hennepin County. I'm also a registered sanitarian. I inspect food, beverage, and lodging facilities. I did actually used to work for the county, Scott County Environmental Health. Got to work with some of the great staff we work with, who are on the board here, especially the staff. And I used to be on a lot of the same construction sites, the erosion control inspections that they're on. We're on the same sites, so I'm familiar with that aspect of the job, and yeah, still currently working for Hennepin County as an inspector. So thanks, and welcome to all the new people.
And I believe Commissioner Barton has also joined us by phone. Perhaps. I was communicating with him in email. He's having some connection problems, so. Well, we give Commissioner Barton a couple minutes. Why don't we give our other guests an opportunity to introduce themselves? We have some other guests that are from some of our partner agencies and county staff that are here with us on a pretty regular basis. I'll start with Melissa Hanson from Spring Lake Township. Melissa, we just want to kind of let everybody know kind of what you do and kind of what your interests are, or the township's interests in the WPC, and how you can how we can help you out.
Sure. Melissa Hanson, I'm the clerk for Spring Lake Township. Lisa Quinn is our supervisor that's generally at these meetings. Unfortunately, she was busy tonight, so she asked me to step in. Our concern and how we work together is around different water issues for the township, because the county is our land authority. We look to them for much of the planning and work that's done in the township, and we're most appreciative for that. So thank you all for the work that you do.
Thanks, Melissa. Manager Loney. Manager Loney joins us from our partner agency at the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District. Manager Loney, would you be willing to kind of introduce yourself and give us a few words?
Sure. I've been on the Watershed District now 6 years and starting my 7th. And we appoint some of our managers to be liaisons to our other partners in the county. And I'm been appointed to be on the Scott WMO Planning Watershed District here. So we're glad to attend your meetings and see what's going on in the other parts of the county.
Thank you, Manager Loney. And then we have Commissioner Brennan here. Commissioner Brennan, obviously, as you all know, is one of our Scott County commissioners, and we're fortunate enough to have one of our commissioners liaison to the WPC. So Commissioner Brennan, if you'd be willing to kind of introduce yourself and maybe say a few words to the commissioners.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's great to meet everybody. I was here last month, but I was on the phone, so I wasn't actually visible. So I had asked to be on the WPC. I'm also the liaison to the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District and the Lower Minnesota River Watershed District. So it's felt like it was a good match to have a good overall watershed view of things when I have to look at them. Let's see, this week I'll be in St. Paul. I think there's 3 topics that I'll be addressing with our legislators, and that's one is solid waste and the impact of solid waste on Scott County and the region. Also the min choices for home health and human services. And the fact that in health and human services, we have a very antiquated software system. I think we have portions of it that's from 1985 and they're still working on a green screen. So I'm hoping to get that changed because it takes a lot of time for our staff to work through that. And it takes a lot of staff to actually work through it also. So that's what I'm doing. And it's great to meet everybody. And I look forward to joining in monthly.
Thank you, Commissioner Brennan. It looks like Commissioner Barton, you were able to resolve the trials and tribulations of technology, and we really appreciate that. Would you be willing to introduce yourself and say a few words and maybe what your interests are?
Yes, hi everyone. So this is my just second meeting, I think. So I'm very excited to be on the Watershed Planning Commission. Personally, I grew up in Scott County on the very southern border. And my family had a farm there. We still have a farm there. So we have Barton Pumpkins is kind of my second job after my full-time one. And so very involved in that. So I kind of grew up and come from a farming background in that perspective. Professionally, I worked in Scott County in Shakopee for a long time doing landscaping. So construction and landscaping. Went to school at the University of Minnesota for urban planning, landscape design. And then I've worked at a watershed district, Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, doing erosion sediment control inspections and working in their regulatory department, and then working on grant programs. And then for the last 10, 11 years, I've been with the Dakota County Soil and Water Conservation District, working on urban conservation programs and projects, and then also serving as the administrator for another watershed, the Lower Mississippi River Watershed Management Organization. So multiple kind of touch points in the water resources world. I just went through my first watershed plan update process. We finished at the beginning of 2024 for the Lower Mississippi River WMO. So I'm familiar with that process and all the different in the water world in the metro here. So very happy to be here to participate.
Wonderful. Thank you, Commissioner. Kate, would you be willing to just introduce yourself and tell everybody what you do and why you're here?
Certainly. Getting my camera on so I can show them. Hi, I'm Kate Sedlacek. I'm the Environmental Services Manager. I get to work with the great staff, Vanessa and Melissa and Ryan, and all the great work that they do. I get to keep sort of a day-to-day or a month look at that. I've been with Scott County for 20 years, and Bill Phillips and I worked together a long time ago on septic. So we're familiar with each other's background, and I am a resident here in the city of Shakopee. So another interest in what's going on here at the WMOs that impacts me here as a county resident. So new commissioners, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate that. And Vanessa, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Kate. Oftentimes if myself, Melissa, or Ryan are unavailable, you'll see Kate stepping in. So she's a great resource. She's often hiding out there in the background, but she's actually a very important role. And speaking of very important roles, and last but definitely not least, is our wonderful partner, Troy, at the SWCD. I know, Troy, obviously you were here the last meeting, you've been at several meetings and will be at all the meetings, of which we are very grateful. But could you maybe introduce yourself and let all the commissioners know a little bit about who you are and what the SWCD does?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, and good afternoon, commissioners. So I'm Troy with the Scott Soil and Water Conservation District. I'm the district director, so we have a staff of 13 currently here. And we get to provide a host of services to Vanessa and her group at the WMO, as well as multiple county departments as well. There's a couple different program areas that we're involved with. The most prominent of those is the technical assistance and cost share program. So I'd call that our bread and butter, and we implement that countywide for all the watersheds. But obviously the biggest line share is with the Scott WMO. We'll work with anywhere from maybe 175 to 200 landowners a year in the WMO and put in anywhere from 50 to 70 projects. We like to report on them as frequently as you can, so we include that project information in your monthly packets, as well as, you know, all the some of the important metrics that we have tracked on a regular basis in some of the other program areas. In addition to technical assistance and cost share, we help implement the countywide clean water education program. We'll do monitoring. If there's a significant monitoring project out there, we'll assist with that and a lot of the field and data collection. We'll do inventory assistance, doing resource inventories and assessments as the WMO needs them, and also help with a little bit of planning. So supporting, for example, the development of the update to the watershed management plan will provide support in whatever way we can. So that's kind of how our involvement is.
Thank you so much, Troy, and thank you, commissioners. With that, Mr. Chair and commissioners, if you're okay, I will roll into my administrator update.
Sounds good. Please proceed. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as Commissioner Brennan noted, it's kind of a large legislative session right now, a lot going on. One of the other hot button items which we are tracking here in Water Resources that has a specific relevance to the work that we do here at the county and the WMO is the governor's proposal to reduce the aquatic invasive species funding by 50%. That's a bit unfortunate for us, and it's quite concerning from our perspective because our aquatic invasive species aid that we're allocated to each year by the state is the only funding source that we have for our aquatic invasive species program. And there are no other really grants or other funding sources other than local funding, taxes, to pay for this type of work. So on average, we receive roughly $75,000 to $100,000 each year, and we spend $100,000 each year. You know, we try to spend what we take in. Sometimes we spend a little bit more, but that work covers, for example, all of our boat inspections across the county. And each year we have prevented aquatic invasive species from entering a lot of our lakes and also from leaving some of our lakes. It also covers rapid response, which we have implemented as well. So if somebody believes they may have identified an invasive species in one of our lakes, the rapid response funding pays to have some experts go out there and see if we can contain it. If you can contain it and eradicate it quickly, you have a much better chance of removing it from that lake before it spreads for the entire lake. If we had to wait for like state funding or something like that, honestly, it would be too late. So unfortunately, aquatic invasive species aid is about, it's only about a $10 million program. So cutting it in half wouldn't really balance the state budget, but it does have a lot of impact here at the county. We pass a lot of that funding directly to our local partners like the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District and cities that implement themselves. And then we just plug the gaps through the county. This is funding that is allocated only to counties, and we're supposed to disseminate that to the lakes as needed. So that is the one other hot button item. We are hoping it does not get approved as is. We are hoping it does not get reduced. And really, we'd like to just see that continue. I think we'd be in kind of a tough spot here in Scott County if we lost that funding, as well as elsewhere in the state. In addition to that, again, I just wanted to thank all the commissioners for being here. Realize this is kind of a new commissioners, but you all bring an amazing set of knowledge and experience and interests, which is really what makes our diverse watershed the best it can really be. Sometimes people don't quite understand what it is that water does, but it's not really a pun that water connects us all. Water resources affects health and human services. It affects our land use and development. It impacts our parks. And ironically, our agriculture, our farmers, our residents, we touch everybody in one way, shape, or form. It's part of what we love about the work, and it's part of what makes the work so interesting. But it also kind of makes it hard to kind of wrap your brain around, well, what all do they do? Well, we do a lot of everything. And that also even includes groundwater. So it takes a little bit to get to know the work that we do and where we focus, but just know that the work you do has a lot of relevant and direct impact here right in Scott County. So thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. With that, I can stand for any questions.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. Any questions for Vanessa on the report?
So are we going, this is Jay Fredericks, are we going to, like, for example, part of the materials for this meeting was the final report on the invasive species thing. Are we going to talk about that in more detail in a bit, or is this a time to bring up some comments on that?
Oh, excellent question, Mr. Fredericks. Melissa will actually do the presentation of the report, and then she will answer any questions you have. And that's really the best time to do that discussion, is during that business item.
Okay, because I'll reserve a point to make then, kind of tying together that with the comment you made about the proposal from Governor Walz.
Absolutely. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other questions for Vanessa? Okay, hearing none, excuse me, next order would be Scott County's SWCD report from Troy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll do a high-level recap of the activities report found in your packet for February. The first chart you see is active service requests. So the blue line indicates all the active service requests. These are landowners within the WMO that contacted us with interest in doing a project or addressing a water resource concern on their property. The green bar next to it indicates the portion of the blue that are actually projects. So not everybody who contacts the office is going to result in a project on the ground. In many cases, we simply provide technical assistance and they're able to address an issue on their own. But the green ones would represent the projects that we're actually involved with and utilize the technical assistance and cost share program funding to implement. So you can see right now we're at a relatively low point in the series of graph or months. You see for the past 13 months there, which just tells us that we got to start knocking on doors, sending out and targeting landowners, reaching out to to let everybody know out there in areas that we want to work, that we have grant funds and have projects that we might be interested in promoting and funding. So that's what we're doing now, and we typically do that this time of year, is to do a pretty significant outreach effort as well.
So,
Below that,
Troy, this is Jay Frederick. So a question I have is there additional data available that would describe the dispensation of those requests? Meaning that, for each of those bars, is there something that says, well, which ones are rejected or sent back for more information, or which ones do become projects? Again, I see the data, but I'm not sure exactly what story it's telling me. It's telling me that we have more requests than projects, assuming that there's some sort of one-to-one correspondence there, but it doesn't really talk to, what's the story behind the gap between those two numbers. Do you have that information?
Yeah, we can certainly put that data together. There's as you're sort of alluding to, there's a ton of data behind these numbers. This is just a very high level representation that really talks about volume on a month-to-month basis, but yeah, we can disaggregate this data and drill down to whatever type of metric you'd like that is more meaningful for you. I would probably want to work with Vanessa and Ryan to figure out exactly what that data is, and we could then present that.
It seems to me, and again, I don't want to be out of school. It's my second meeting, but I'm just trying to apply my sensibilities here.
Yep.
It seems to me that you would want to know, what happens to these requests that come in.
Yep.
And again, I don't know what the various buckets are. Obviously, one bucket is it gets, transitioned into a project, but I don't know what happens to the others. And I
Sure.
don't know whether there's ones that are, project worthy, but either we don't have the time or the money. And so they're then out there kind of in some holding,
Mhm.
pen until they are able to be addressed. Some of them, as you say, may be handled through other ways. It just seems like that would be, I don't know if there's a percentage breakdown, but it just seems like there would be some more informative information that would allow that chart to maybe come alive a little bit more, other than just a pure counting.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do have data behind that and can probably get something that you're looking for. Be happy to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great question.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Fredericks, one other thing to kind of note here, just as a FYI, when we put together our annual report, we will have a breakdown graph that basically shows the different areas that these projects fall within. So you've got your soil health, your traditional erosion, and so forth, urban, all the various different categories. So like Troy said, there is more data behind all this, but just as a heads up too, that when we do share with you the annual report, there will be some more details that are shared too with that data, in more of a breakdown of project by project, where did they all fall within different categories. So just kind of as a heads up, and that's usually the April timeframe when you'll see that at one of these meetings.
It's due as a state required annual report. So the deadline is actually the end of April. So we'll usually have it for you at the April or May meeting, depending upon the workload that week.
Don't get me wrong. I don't want to go nuts. I don't want to get overly granular where we're counting like onesies and twosies, but maybe let's start with the data that you have, certainly before you would go out and try to, capture new data. But just maybe we can talk through how to make this picture a little more meaningful. I mean, I went through the last year or so of reports. I know it's something that gets reported monthly, and that's great, but it's like, okay, so what? I mean, what's it actually saying?
No, those are great questions, and Commissioner Fredericks, this is your report. So if there's things that we can incorporate and do differently, I'm all in favor of working with the staff and coming up with something that is not just data, but is information. And that's what you want to be able to see. And we can certainly do that. So be happy to. So in keeping with that, the next two are graphs that kind of drill down to specific areas of work. The specific a subset of those of the chart you see above, the green, are soil health and cover crop projects. And this graph with the brown hues on it is a specific metric talking about acres of soil health practices that we've enabled countywide. And so you can see that our efforts have been paying off as we focus this as a priority area, and that's being reflected in some of the results that we're seeing in the numbers. Similarly, equipment rental program, we have equipment that we actually rent out to producers to be able to do certain types of conservation, production techniques, no-till specifically. and doing seeding of perennial cover and various types of projects like that. And this is an indication of how many acres our equipment is being used on from year to year. And you can see from in 24, we had actually a record year. We had almost 3,000 acres covered with our various pieces of equipment. And at some point, if there's interest, we can show you more detail, maybe do a presentation on what that equipment looks like, what it does, and how we use it. So we can drill down on that as well. Cost share funds is just a snapshot of our current.
Sorry, this is Jay again. And again, this is interesting, but I guess I would want to understand the so what. So again, it's a bar chart. It shows, you know, that you have equipment, you have the coverage that is maybe going up slightly year over year. But how does that tie back to something that is meaningful? You know, what does it do? What does it save? What does it, help? Otherwise it's just kind of data, but it doesn't really say anything. And so again, I would encourage, just in general, from my perspective, coming from a corporate environment, is it's kind of limited value if it doesn't tie back to the so what. And so I would just encourage that.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Barton, I would say when I look at that graph, there's definitely a difference. The first one you're talking about, Jay, where it's basically 1 year, month to month. That kind of just gives me a sense of the annual ebbs and flows of interest that the SWCD is dealing with, and increased interest. It would be interesting to see those active requests for assistance in projects similar to how you have the other two charts over the last 6, 7, 8 years. That's a different set of data. And how much are people coming more to the SWCD for assistance than they were 5 years ago, or less? And is that resulting in more in general or less projects year over year? One way that I think about this is, I don't know, like maybe there's a comparable way is like water quality monitoring data. It's like, well, we take samples throughout the whole year and we have less samples or more samples, but then really we're looking at that tells us something. But another way to look at it is year over year, over the last 10 years, what is the trend? And so, maybe that's kind of where our Watershed Planning Commission board heads are, is looking at those long-term trends. And so back to that one, like the soil health cover crop practices, I can pull out of there, there's definitely a trend in, we've gone from, I don't know, 1,300 cover crop soil health practices in acres. And now we're, getting close to doubling that over 6 years. So nearly double the acres of cover crops, implemented annually on Scott County soil. So that tells a lot. The amount of residue management, at least being reported to the SWCD, is higher. Maybe some people were still doing it. So it's interesting, and getting at what you're saying, Jay, is like, how do we tease out that huge increase in residue management in 2024? Are we better reporting or recording data? Or is there a reason why there's a huge increase in residue management? And maybe this is something you talked about last year when that kind of came out. But also nutrient management numbers have really gone up. So what does that attribute to? And maybe, there's additional staffing that has been, and funding that has been provided by the state for soil health. So are we attributing those things, to correlate those together? And then the cedar numbers, yeah, that's again just kind of looking over long terms. So that's at least how I'm interpreting this data. But there's certainly other ways that you could slice and dice it to get more information out of it.
That's right. And then again, the part that I'm also saying is, so like that cover crop, so great, it's doubled. I assume double is good, but I don't know what it actually means. So, is it saving, X amount of erosion? Is it, why is doubling good other than it's just twice, it's, again, maybe it's implicit to everyone. It's not necessarily implicit to me as to why doubling. I take it at faith that it's good, but why is it good? And can we explain that somehow in a way that is consumable.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Fredericks, it's a great question, and maybe we need to do a little bit more background too on those items. In particular, just I won't get into heavy details of this, but like soil health, the initiative there was a big push in our current plan, and so the idea of that graph is meant to kind of show how are we doing with that metric, with putting additional resources in, focusing more on that. And that's also the nutrient and residue management is more of a heavy emphasis on those. And that graph is intended to kind of show the more effort being put into it, what are the results? And the results are that we're seeing an increase in the number of acres for those. And so I think we could probably give more background to it, and that might help with the context of some of these as well, if you think that would be beneficial.
Yeah, and again, like I'm not trying to blow anything up. I'm just coming in cold, trying to consume it and to understand what it means. Again, if it means something to everyone else and I missed the context point 3 meetings ago, I'm good. I'll catch up and then we don't need to worry about it.
No.
I'm going to jump in here. This is a great conversation. Mr. Chair and commissioners, here's what we can do. And this comes from many different perspectives, but like you said, fresh eyes, new eyes, different perspectives. And this is exactly what we want to hear. These are the things we want to hear about. So as Troy mentioned, the purpose of this report is to provide an update on our programs here at the WMO that the SWCD is implementing for us, and then also to share things that we have in common through our partnership that are being implemented. However, the piece that's probably missing is, again, kind of, we're starting to tease this out, is how does this tie into what we're supposed to be doing? How does this tie into our goals? How does this tie into what we've promised to achieve? So I think what we can definitely do is sit down and kind of go through the report and actually insert those connections as to how this connects to our plan, how this connects to our goals, how this helps us achieve what we committed to do. And that probably is one place to start that can make it more consumable and more relatable, and a little bit more action-based rather than just data-based. So we'll definitely do that.
Yep, and I agree. It's I look forward to working on that. At the end of the day, we want this information to be useful and helpful for your purposes, not just to report numbers. We get to certain places where we are because of past interests or questions. I mean, the whole addition of the soil health cover crop practice is because there was interest in it. So that satisfied that, but we're not going to sit still and get complacent about it. We want to make sure that this data is meaningful, and I look forward to working with staff to help that being as lightning and enlightening as possible. And we do have the data, so we shouldn't have a problem doing it. It's just more of knowing exactly how to present it. So let's keep going, Ryan. The cost share funds are just a snapshot of what's available within the Scott WMO. The award amount is total active reward. So these are grants that are in play, not expired. And then the encumbered amounts show how much of that we've already dedicated or committed to projects, and of course the balance. So the next item is clean water, just reporting some high-level activities associated with the clean water education program. There's about a dozen partners to the education program. The Scott WMO is the lion's share. They contribute over half of the total funding for the program. And it was really initiated by the WMO for a countywide effort. Right now, Shelby Roberts, who manages the program, she's our education specialist. She's putting together the annual report. So you should have a copy of that in the very near future, as well as a copy of the 2025 work plan. And similarly, if the report isn't providing the data you find it most useful, then we can certainly address that as well. We'll skip down. The next section is water quality, groundwater rainfall monitoring. So as you can see, no big surprise, we don't have any activity this time of year with respect to any monitoring. The groundwater observation well is a countywide measurement program. We have about 12.5 wells scattered throughout the county that we monitor on a quarterly basis. That we report that out, and just basically tracking groundwater elevations at different aquifers within the county. So we didn't take any readings this past month, but we'll every quarter, like I say, so 4 times a year, and we'll report that out. And on occasion, we've had commissioners request, well, what's happening with our groundwater? So we do a maybe extra report in your packet once or twice a year to show what the trends have been for the year and then for the past 10 years. So you can get that as well. Precipitation monitoring, that's just kind of an FYI to kind of see how we're tracking in the year. We have about a dozen sites around the county where we have volunteer monitors that report rainfall. And we have one here at the Jordan field office. And so that's the light or the dark number or dark chart or bar that you see. That's the average. And then the lighter blue shows kind of what we actually recorded for the year. So you can see where.
Hey. Oh, sorry. Hey, Troy.
Yeah.
Clayton Wagner here. I have a question, if that's okay. With regard to the precipitation monitoring, do you work in conjunction? So you mentioned it was all volunteers and whatnot. Do you work in collaboration with other entities within the county, like mosquito control district and whatnot, to, I guess, prevent silozation and things like that? Or do we have our own?
Yes, Commissioner Wagner, what we do is this is with the state climatology office. So we collect the data well, it's actually with the DNR, but that goes into a state database, and that's used by multiple just about anybody can use that data. So it could be mosquito control. The data does feed long-term trends, which help establish atlases or guides that are used for engineering purposes. I mean, there's a whole host of things, but it's part of a statewide initiative. And I don't really know the full extent of how that data is all used, but it's definitely available and used for multiple purposes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Question?
Yeah, that answers the question. I was clarifying if we weren't duplicating the task of measuring precipitation. So that clarifies it. Thank you.
Yep. You're welcome.
I will say, I was gonna jump in. We do really hate duplication. So if you ever find duplication, we'll definitely suss it out and get it sorted out. So it's a great question to ask.
We do receive a grant from the DNR every year that helps pay for some of the effort. But again, it's part of a statewide program managed by the DNR. Construction erosion control, this kind of a snapshot again, if you want more data on what this means, but essentially it's just showing month to month how many inspections we're doing for the county on construction sites. We're checking for erosion control measures and ensuring they're compliant with the county ordinances. That's the blue bars. And then the purple line, just kind of a graph to show the number of new plan reviews that we completed. And typically the number of plan reviews that we do 1 month might reveal themselves in more inspections 6 months from now. But it's just kind of one snapshot on the amount of activity out there with respect to building permits. And again, just one metric. Subwatershed assessment. So you should see a draft report coming through pretty soon. We have completed the Raven Stream 1 and 2. Those were 2 phases, and those reports are under final review. I've been meaning to get that out for a while now, but we're pretty close on those. And then when they are released then, and I'm sure that there'll be questions on them, and maybe we can get in more detail at that time in terms of what these are and what they mean and how we use them. But I believe, Vanessa, correct me if I'm wrong, but they would be used as part of your watershed plan update to help target and prioritize down the road, maybe.
Correct.
All right, I'll skip past the Wetland Conservation Act. With buffer law, so I'll just touch on that. We do inspections for compliance with the state buffer law. We do a third of the county every year. So every 3 years, we review a certain area. And this past year, we did the southwest area of the county, or what southwest third, if you will, which covers pretty much all WMO area in that part of the county. Compliance is very good, but we have some situations where it's not significant, but we're seeing some encroachment into buffers over time. So 1 year, they could be compliant, and then we come back 3 years and they're 5 feet into the buffer just from gradually kind of encroaching into it. And those are kind of the main issues we're dealing with now. Probably a dozen or so cases out there out of thousands of parcels, maybe a dozen or so where the minimum buffer width is less than what the state law requires. And we just work with them one-on-one to try to get back into compliance. Excuse me. Finally, I'll report on our native tree seed and plant sale program. So far, or at least as of reporting, we had 242 orders and sold over 12,000 trees. And then the final part of the report just tables out the number of new applications for the technical assistance and cost share program that we received, the approvals, and then the payment. So you can see we had one smaller project for cover crops, 1,700 approved this past month, and then did a little over $47,000 in payments. And I think that'll conclude my report, Mr. Chair, and if there's any questions, I'll stand by.
Thank you, Troy.
Jay,
Appreciate it.
I had a question. So on this that you're going through right now, can you go back up to the golf course one? So can you go down just a little bit to the data at the bottom? So this, I think this is, I mean, it's interesting to me on the, kind of the before and after. Again, this to me ties to the so what of the project is, okay, well, this is what we accomplished. We were able to reduce the soil erosion, et cetera, et cetera. The one thing that I guess my question is if I understand the data table at the right, it's kind of getting to like a unit cost per unit of improvement, if I understand it correctly. Okay. And I guess a question would be, is there some goal for that? Because if you look at this versus the next two projects, these ended up costing about 5 times as much per unit of improvement. So again, is that, well, I guess, is it knowable in advance? And is that something that we use as a criteria to decide on projects? Because, again, know nothing about it, but just consuming the data, it would seem like this was a much less bang for the buck project than the other two.
Yes, and yes to both your questions. So we routinely look at cost benefit. We do an assessment of each project before we decide if we want to fund them. The cost benefit also dictates how approval happens. If it doesn't meet certain thresholds established by the WMO, then we don't approve them. We actually kick them off to you guys, and you decide whether or not they're worth funding. And that's based on a unit cost, specifically for sediment. So that's the metric. And if it's above a certain threshold, and we set that on an annual basis, then that approval is more subject to scrutiny and more intense determination if it's worth funding. In this particular one, you'll see it's not particularly cost effective, but you also see we did not use any WMO funds on it. We knew that this wasn't that cost effective a project, so we used other sources of funding, not WMO funding, and that was specifically because of what you're looking at. It was relatively high. Now, just because it's high doesn't mean it's not a good project, but it determines the level of scrutiny and before we actually decide to go ahead with the project.
Well, sorry, it also depends, going all the way back to the first chart, of what was left on the table in order to do this project. So again, if in those blue lines, we left other projects on the table, I would hope that it was only because they were less efficient than these.
They would either be
Than
less efficient,
not than these, than this one.
right? They could either be less efficient, or maybe is this wasn't a project that was feasible. Like in some cases, it's just not a cost-effective solution. And we would basically make that determination and leave it at that. Others, there's just not a project to be had from the start. The landowner was just interested in how they could do something on their own. So that's the technical assistance piece of it, where it wasn't necessarily they were looking for funding, they were just looking for that technical help on what they could do. But yeah, those are all good questions, and kind of all of them actually go into play when we're actually making decisions about what projects we fund and which ones we won't.
I will add, commissioners and Troy, that the one other component which Troy mentioned was that this one happened to be eligible for other funding sources, which are generally other grants. So it is also possible, and does sometimes happen, that another project is left on the table that may have been more cost effective because it was simply ineligible for that funding based upon location, type of project, et cetera, et cetera. So, and we, between us, the SWCD, all of our partners, we go after a lot of grants. A lot of what we do is grant funded, but those grants have a lot of requirements tied to them, and unfortunately, they don't necessarily fund everything. But sometimes it does occur where a lower cost benefit project is eligible, where a higher cost benefit, project is eligible where a lower one is not. So that's one other situation in which something like this might get funded over a lower cost, higher benefit project.
Just as a question, this funding source of cooperator, is that then the submitter, or is that somebody else?
Correct, that's the landowner. Typically, it's the landowner. That's their share of it.
So in this case, it was the golf course.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, exactly.
If I could
Mr.
add,
Go ahead.
Joe Barton, Commissioner Barton, if I could add too, one thing that's important to remember with all these projects is that it's voluntary conservation. So you also have to weigh, we're using public funds responsibly for projects that we see value in within our watershed, but we can't force landowners to do these projects in most cases. So there's an aspect of, playing ball with the people that want to play with us, right? We want to maintain positive relationships. We want to be reactive and responsive and provide services to people that come to us, the WMO and the SWCD, for service. So, when I look at that too, it's not as cost effective as other projects, but that's still a pretty cost effective stabilization. And so you kind of just got to weigh, if we don't provide any funding and we say, sorry, it's not cost effective enough for us, there might be nothing that happens, and that bank just continues to erode. So it's weighing, the relative cost effectiveness or benefits of a project against that project just not happening at all, should we choose to not support it. So there's definitely a balance and a lot of other things at play, and just, the fact that the term voluntary conservation, I think, is the biggest takeaway too here, with the fact that we just we're relying on willing landowners to participate with us to make these improvements.
Great feedback, I guess, but Joe, because of your, I think, other background, what is or isn't still cost effective. If someone has zero contacts like me, that was part of my question, is, are there targets, or, here's a 1-star project versus a 2-star project versus a 3-star project. I don't know what those mean. All I can do is look at the data and say, well, this one costs 4 or 5 times more than the other. Again, it's kind of like what I said earlier, on the surface, that's bad, but I don't have the context to know whether it's really bad or not bad. Maybe the other ones were like dynamite, unheard of cost effectiveness, and this one is more typical. I just don't have that context.
Yep, but that's why it's an absolute great question. And that's why, because it's getting that context, which has made additionally more challenging and fascinating for you, because this happens to be a WMO program, which, as Commissioner Barton mentioned, is voluntary. And this is not forced. This is not ever used to have somebody meet a regulatory requirement, because the WMO itself is a non-regulating entity. However, when we take off our WMO hats and we put on our county hats, because that's the same staff does both jobs, the county itself does regulate. And so you kind of also got to remember, like, there's a lot to wrap your brain around when you're looking at the kind of things that we show you. And is it, for the WMO? Is it for the county? Where is the supply? So it's a very good question, and some really great conversation. It's very funny because,
My understanding, this is all public record, right?
Absolutely.
So again, if without going to a ton of extra work, I think, and again, I have no idea if people read this or don't read this, or, I don't know. But to the extent that we can make it to where it's not inside baseball and there's something that helps people know, is this good, bad, whatever, in an easy way, I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing for me because I don't know anything about it. But again, if people who want to read this and come to conclusions of whether we're making good decisions or bad decisions, or using the money wisely or not using the money wisely, I think it's just a helpful thing to do.
To that point, Troy, I like that you guys have like kind of baseline metrics for cost effectiveness for different project types. Maybe there's some kind of reference to that annual baseline and where this project falls in that's included standard for fact sheets. I feel like that would kind of get at what Jay's asking about. Like, is this, I mean, it is only one metric, so take it with a grain of salt, but that would show where you're at in terms of cost effectiveness compared to the baseline.
So I want the same thing. Yep.
I want to jump. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I want to jump away from the cost efficacy just for a moment. I would like someone with engineering or watershed background to explain to me a portion of this photograph. Now that I'm not driving and not just listening in. What was the thought process of removing that tree along the bank and putting riprap in? I like someone with more experience in that regard than me. Just explain it to me, and we don't have to delve into it. I just want to know.
Troy, do you want me to? I can, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Wagner. So and I don't know the exact background of this particular project, but just from a general sense, the why that tree would be removed is the bank itself is vertical in the before picture. And with that, it's just going to lead to instability along that bank. And I don't know if it's outside of its floodplain or not. It's hard to tell if there is sort of a floodplain on that side or not. But if there's not a floodplain, it's just going to keep going. It'll just keep eroding, and it'll lay that slope back. So more than likely that tree in time is going to end up in the creek. And then the photo on the bottom, the after, what they're essentially doing is they're expediting that process of erosion that's occurring to lay that slope back. So they call it an angle of repose. So, nothing's really going to want to grow on a vertical slope. So what you're trying to do is lay that slope back to an angle that's stable, that won't continually erode and lose soil there. And in order to do that, to actually lay a slope from vertical 1-to-1 to probably a 3-to-1, you have to actually remove some of that material, and with that tree would go through that process. And so the idea is basically creating a stable slope and kind of laying it back.
Awesome.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you for
Yep.
teaching me in that regard.
You're welcome. No problem.
Counterintuitive, so appreciate it.
I will add, Ryan does an excellent job with a whiteboard as well. So next time we get together, if you want a visual, he does excellent drawings. He'll never admit to that, but he actually does a very good job of it.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yep, you're welcome.
Okay, any other questions for Troy? If not, next would be program updates from Ryan.
Sure, commissioners. So I've got kind of some brief updates, and then I actually prepared a PowerPoint presentation of our Pika Creek ravine stabilization. So hopefully that will elicit some more conversation. You get to see the project, and then eventually, hopefully, you get to actually see this project in person. So, but first, I'll start out with the updates, and then we'll get into the PowerPoint. So if you remember at the last meeting, we talked about that week was kind of a big week for us. We're doing all our reporting for state grants. And so happy to report that all of our reports got in on time. So we've got a couple of them through the watershed-based implementation funding. We've also got some shoreland grants. We also work with the soil and water on some of the natural resources block grants that we get from the state. Those all got turned in on time as well. And then we also have another grant through EPA. So the ones I guess I was responsible for, there's 5 of them, and they all got in on time, which it's kind of a stressful week. So I'm glad that's over and we're past it. One of those grants was a final. And so we just got word this morning that we have to go through a reconciliation with the Board of Water and Soil Resources. So that was for a stream bank stabilization project that we constructed the last winter, the previous one. And so we will then work to comply with all the requirements of that, submitting our staff time, invoices, all that information. It's actually all in their reporting system already, but we'll put it in email form and get it sent off to them here within the next week or two.
Say in layman's term, that's basically called an audit by the state of your project. That's what it is.
Yes, thank you. So, and audits can be a little scary, so we'll see how it goes, but we feel confident with everything, and we'll report back once we hear from the state on how we did with it. So next, so the 9 Elements grant is a phased grant. And so if we complete all the phases, it's actually a 16-year long grant. And so phase 1 will conclude this August. So we're kind of on the tail end of that grant. We're starting actually phase 2, the process of getting that executed. And phase 2 was intended to pay for this Pika Creek ravine. As you're going to see in the PowerPoint, the project is largely complete, not fully, but largely. And so we are in the process of working with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and also Environmental Protection Agency on, how do we kind of pivot, or do we have to pivot? Could we still use some of these funds for that project, or do we have to get creative and think of another way to use those funds? And not to alarm you, there are plenty of other opportunities to use them. It was just sort of, we planned for the last 5 years since we've known about this phase to time the start of that grant with this project, and it didn't work out. And that's life sometimes. And so now we'll work with NPCA and just kind of see where we go from here. So just to kind of give you a heads up on that. We are also in the process of submitting, this would be our 4th round of WBIF, which stands for Watershed-Based Implementation Funding, and that's through Bowser, the Board of Water and Soil Resources. So we're in the process of submitting an application for the next round of those funds. And then after the application process, assuming it gets approved, we will go through what's called a work plan approval, where you actually outline all your activities. And that's sort of the kickoff of that grant. Once that gets approved, then you execute your contract, you can start work on the projects after that. So we're in the process of that as well. And I guess I'll stop if there's any questions for that, because the next step in this would be the PowerPoint. So I'll stand for any questions on any of the fun grant stuff we've been working on. All right. Well, hopefully this is at least somewhat exciting to share. This is what I've been kind of doing for the last, well, to give you kind of a background on these larger scale projects. This one, we actually started working with the consultant in 2022. So it's kind of been a long process. What part of the delay was is we had 2 CIPs going at the same time, and we didn't know the funds of which one would be funded by which grant. And so they're not always typically that long, you know, a 2+, you know, almost 3-year period, but this one did take a little bit of time. To give you further background to understand why we chose this project is we did a study in 2015, a feasibility study, and it was basically, in a nutshell, we were looking for the highest sediment contributors to Sand Creek. And why, you might ask, why is this Pika Creek? Pika Creek is a tributary to Sand Creek. So it flows into Sand Creek, and it was part of our scope, the area that we wanted to look within. So through water quality monitoring, we know that Middle Sand Creek watershed, which stretches from basically south of Jordan to north of New Prague, that stretch of Sand Creek has 10 to 15 times the total suspended solids of any other watershed on Sand Creek. So we know that particular area is contributing a lot of sediment. But we also knew that the corridor from Jordan to south of Shakopee, like Seavers Corn Maze along 169, so from about Seavers to City of Jordan, that area too is a bluff, and that's where kind of Pika Creek runs. And we knew that was highly erosive from working with landowners in that area, being on site, looking at these ravines. So that was also part of the scope of this feasibility study. Fast forward to this project, this was actually one of the highest sediment contributors that was identified in that study. But being the scale of what this is, we knew it came with a large price tag. And so it took a while to build up our own reserves and lining up additional funding for this project to actually be able to implement it. This project, the winning bid came in at $653,000 roughly for the project. And so for us, that's a fairly large project. It's one of our larger CIPs that we've done over the last 10 to 15 years. So I want to give you kind of some background of the why we're here, why we did this project. Why this particular ravine stood out. So in that study, what they did is they compared 2 years of LiDAR data, which would be your contours. And they compared the 2 years to be able to tell the difference. So in that span of those 2 years worth of LiDAR data, how much did it change? There would be a void between those two, because contours in 1 year compared to 10 years down the road, the difference is really showing how much erosion is happening, how much of that land is sort of washing away. And this particular site showed up as being one of the highest contributors. That LiDAR data that we used showed it was very actively eroding, and that's why we ended up pursuing it. So, and I'll show you the actual numbers here in a minute of what we're looking at for reductions. But I'll just get into it and then just stop me if you got questions about what we're looking at, and I'd be happy to explain. So just briefly, design, touched on it a little bit. These are just some snippets of the design from the actual plans that SRF completed for us. So they started in the winter of 2022 and they completed design this past summer, which then allowed us to go out to bid in the fall for the project. And basically, to make it as simple as possible, it's a lot of rock and it's a lot of fabric that went into the stabilization of this particular ravine. So pre-construction, some site conditions, so you can just kind of see it is actively eroding ravine with areas that are stable. You can kind of see as the trees are growing towards the channel. There are areas that are actually stable within this ravine. And then as you can see in the side photos, there are areas that are very much unstable, active sloughing, rotational failures, and all the above with this ravine. And so it was a good candidate to use. These are actually the reduction numbers. So it's getting close to 500 tons of sediment per year, close to 500 pounds per year of phosphorus being reduced by this project, this one project. Just some challenges of what we faced throughout construction of the project. It's a very weird site. It's just under 2,000 feet long, this stabilization. And up at the head of the ravine, you have water. And then in the middle part of this ravine, no water at all, pure sand in the channel. And at the very bottom, you've got flowing water. So very odd, interesting, not normal, I guess. And that poses challenges. The flowing water in particular at the bottom posed the most challenges. And why we wanted to work on this project in the winter is partly for that reason, that some of those seeps actually froze over on the head of the ravine that helped us. It always had flowing water the entire time during construction at the bottom, and never once had water in the middle. So other challenges, top right, just weather, snow. Luckily, we didn't have much of it. Did cause issues and equipment slips and all that when you're working on steeper slopes. And then the bottom right photo is our access. So if the very first week they started to work, they had equipment buried in some of this stuff before they sort of built themselves a road. And I'll show you some pictures of their flow management. They put in some pipes to be able to cross the ravine in a few spots. And once they got that kind of in place, that access road, there was really no issues from that point on in terms of just access for equipment. So here's the clearing and grubbing. So obviously with this project, we had to clear out some of the trees that were within the construction limits. Kind of a neat operation, one that I had not seen before. This crew that came in, it was Castle Rock, was the sub for excuse me, clearing and grubbing, taking the trees out. It can be a one-person operation. That excavator and chipper you see on the right-hand side, kind of neat. They drive the excavator, and then with a remote control within the cab of the excavator, they have the chipper follow them. So kind of, interesting. And I didn't know that technology sort of existed till they were out on site using it. And that chipper is pretty serious. It can take care of some fairly large logs in a matter of seconds. So that's just showing them kind of chipping some logs in one of the staging areas. Middle photo just shows some of the cut logs or trees that are down. And then this left-hand photo is that they actually repurposed some of the logs to build a bridge over the channel. And then you can kind of see this blue pipe that was the pipe that actually held, allowed flow to continue to move through that area. A lot of fabric encapsulated lifts. So the brown material you see, that's what they call them FES lifts. They stand for fabric encapsulated lift. What it is basically they have this double wrapped blanket. It's a coconut and a straw fiber blanket that they peel that back. They put these wooden forms that you can see in the front of the structures. They put those down, they wrap the fabric, and then they fill that with black dirt, something that's actually going to grow vegetation. Then they seed that down with native vegetation, and then we will come back with shrub plugs this spring to actually plant within those structures. But each of these fabric encapsulated lift areas, it typically had 3 rows. Some instances we were able to reduce some of those numbers based on just, we didn't want to have, a higher humped lift that has nothing on the backside of it. So if the ravine itself was flat or, we couldn't tie into it very well, we could reduce them at times. But generally speaking, it was this 3 encapsulated lifts above all of our kind of rock structures. Turf reinforced matting. So there was an existing project on this ravine that had failed previously. It was a wooden crib wall, and we wanted to address this. This was a major concern of one of the landowners. And so what a turf reinforced mat is, it's a really heavy duty plastic mat that gets laid down. They use these helical screws to basically go in and anchor that matting to the slope. And it's intended for these steeper slopes where it's the design life of these is quite long. It's in the decades where that material should not deteriorate. It's not like a normal blanket, not like the straw blanket you see on top of it. This is some heavy duty plastic. And then they actually put the black dirt on top of it. So you can kind of see the green is that TRM. That black dirt on top is intended to once again have vegetation growing through that matting. The long-term solution is vegetation to stabilize that slope. And that black dirt is obviously then intended for something to be able to grow through it. Like with any of these projects, these aren't cookie cutter. This isn't like a road or a structure. So for instance, this turf reinforced matting, I think we doubled the quantity that was on the plan. And that's just part of some of these projects, is that we can certainly identify what we believe to be the right amount, and you get out in the field and you start working on it, and you just see that you need more of that material than you originally thought. And so the contractor was great to work with. They were flexible and easygoing in instances like this where we needed to adjust. Here's another example of an adjustment. So the rock ditch check. So this is a tributary ravine that actually flows into the main channel. You can see the rock there on the left is the planned quantity. And then you can see the kind of the survey tripod, those yellow poles next to it. You can see that's still in the ravine, and there's not rock that's going all the way across. What that means is the planned quantity showed that was the amount of rock the plan had. The photo on the right actually shows what needed to go in. So we basically doubled the rock there to be able to capture all the flow. If we left it as the photo on the left, you'd have flow skirting around our rock, potentially causing erosion, undermining what we did. And so once again, it's an example of you got to adjust on the fly with some of these projects to be able to actually fulfill the intent of what you're trying to accomplish out there. And, sometimes it means additional funds. In this case, we were actually able to work out, deals with the contractor on reducing some of the other quantities like the lifts to be able to accommodate, added rock in this situation. We're just going to get into some terms that are unique to this project. We could work with another consulting company on a similar project, and they might just term something different. This is what they termed a rock riffle. It's basically rock all throughout the channel, and then it's got those FES lifts on the side. The rock riffle has a higher elevation of rock on the front end, sort of acting as a check dam, so water flows down the channel, hits that higher amount, slows it down, lets it build up, accumulate sediment on the front end, hopefully drops some of that, and then flows over the rock into the rest of the structure. At the very end of it, there's a pool that, once again, there's rock built up at the very end. That water pools in front of it, hopefully sediment drops, and then it spills over the top of it. And so there was a few of these structures that they built. Here's a picture of what it looks like when it's done. Hard to see the rock, how I was describing, as higher in the front, low at the very end, and then high at the very, very tail end of it. But just gives you an idea of, you know, magnitude of the project and what they were kind of doing. These are log drops. So these were an alternate that they added to the project. They were, I think, roughly $40,000-$50,000, and we were able to construct them. The neat thing is they actually salvaged all these logs from on site. So not everything needed to get chipped, or the tree contractor actually took some of the logs on site and repurposed them as well. But this is basically a kind of a V or a U shape where water hits these logs, flows into the rock, and then continues on down. It's the intent of all these structures that are placed in the middle of the channel is to slow that velocity down as it's moving down the channel. So they're all strategically placed as we move down the channel of the ravine. Heavy toe protection, so just kind of showing an aerial view. I was able to get up on top of the embankment and just kind of take some photos looking down. Photo on the left, you can kind of see that log drop structure, the U shape in front of the rock there. And then also the photo on the right is showing kind of heavy and light toe protection. And I'll show you, oh, sorry, that's showing the heavy toe protection for this one. It has the lifts on top of the rock. And then I'll show you what light toe protection is as well. But once again, it's just different terminology. So instead of having a lift on top of the rock here, there's just no lift. It's just lesser scale, I guess, is how I'd phrase it for the stabilization method. That granular material was used throughout the project. That 3-inch minus that you see down below our granite rock, that's basically just to kind of hold everything together, act as a base for everything to kind of sit on. Some more parts of stabilization, just thought they were kind of neat photos. Looks a little, I think it looks kind of better from this aerial kind of view. I hope to get some drone photos from the contractor. They flew it with a drone out there as well. So once I get those, I can share that with the group if they'd like as well. One unique thing, we try to accommodate the landowners. This is all voluntary. And so if there's reasonable requests that they have, we're happy to help if it helps facilitate this project. And this was one where the landowner asked if on one of these rock stabilizations, if he could actually have a crossing so he could get access to the other side of the ravine on his property. And so we were able to accommodate that. And this is his kind of ATV, UTV crossing across the ravine. So just kind of want to show you that we are willing to work with these landowners, and we understand what they're putting into this project. We don't pay them for anything. And so they're dedicating these easements that allow us to come out here, and just the inconvenience that they face during the construction of these. And so something as simple as this is something that we certainly can work with them on. These are just some coir logs. We placed them at areas where there wasn't other stabilization that we felt as though maybe could use some added protection. We got to go back and actually stake these down, and I'll get into that on the last slide too. Restoration work. So they're, like I said, they're largely done with the project. There's still work to be done, but they've kind of got a lot of their blanket mulch, perimeter control, all that kind of in place, and just kind of waiting for the next steps, which we need to add some staples in some of the blanket areas. Areas that got mulch that need blanket, not from a permitting standpoint, but just from we'd like it to have blanket. They will put that in when conditions will allow. They're gonna do some touch-up work, seeding. I mean, you gotta imagine that when we get snow melt and rainfall events, we're gonna have to do some amount of touch-up work on what they did. We'll continue with our erosion control inspections, which we're required to do for our permit. And then we're coming back with shrub plantings in the spring and summer. And then the contractor is on the hook for 1 year to ensure that both the native grass seed forbs that are planted and the shrubs are still, you know, in adequate condition. They're not dead. So they'd have to replace them if that's the case. So with that, a lot of information. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ryan. Any questions for Ryan?
It's Jay, a couple of quick questions. So understanding the scope changes when you get on the ground and things are maybe different than what were originally thought, but is the underlying structure of this, was it a fixed bid contract? Was it a T&M contract?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Fredericks, it is, so the way we've got it kind of structured is it's an itemized contract that is awarded to the lowest responsible bidder. So Vite was the lowest bid, and the responsible part of their bid is that they, you know, provide us their insurance. They meet all the, in our bid packet, we outline all, it's like 300 pages. We outline all these various things that they have to comply with. And so once we determine that they can comply with all of those, that's what leads to the being responsible. And then, yes, it's an itemized bid, but you know, we can work with the contractor. Like for instance, rock went over, fabric went under a little bit, and so we can work with the contractor on ensuring that it's fair both ways.
A fixed bid with a change order process attached to it.
Yeah, you can do, yep. So you could, if we deviated, you know, from the quantities, there is a process in place for doing change orders. Yes, we didn't do any for these as of now, but you can. And there's a process that we have outlined for doing that.
And they did the engineering and the construction, or was the engineering done separate?
So the engineering was completed by SRF Consulting, and we did a request for proposal for that. So we had actually received 2 proposals to do the design work. They also provide construction observation, which means that they're on site when we request them to be out there to determine that the contractor is building things according to specs, if we have questions. And so they were on site a fair amount. We'd schedule meetings for them to be out there during different phases. So the important things were when they first did their first rock riffle, we got the consultant out there. Let's make sure they know how to do a rock riffle, right? So then the next one, we all are on the same page of that's how you build this rock riffle. Same thing with all the other structures, rock ditch check, rock cross vein, log drop, all those, we would make sure that the engineers are on site during that process. So we all agree it's being built according to plans. And then the actual construction itself is a separate process from the design work. So it's that's where we put together basically like a few 100-page packet of all the things, permit, design, you know, if it's a federal or a state grant, what are the requirements of those? And so you have to meet wage rates, you know, the employees need to be paid and compensated a certain threshold to meet that prevailing wage. And so when we have to verify that.
Public bid type stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and then a last question, I guess, is do the engineering firm and or the contractor, do they have any accountability for the outcome? Meaning that you know, I don't know what, you know, you started with what the current situation was with, I can't remember, 400, 500 um, tons of sediment per year, and phosphorus. And by the way, quick side note, do I, because they're always, on the ones I've seen so far, there seems to be almost like a direct ratio of like 1 pound of phosphorus per ton. Is that kind of the general rule? Do I get that pattern
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
you can use that as a general rule of thumb, which in this case, it's not a coincidence that they're the exact same number. So yes, in this case, it was a 1-to-1 ratio.
But is there like was there like a stipulated desired outcome that we reduce it from, you know, 400 and whatever to 50 or something like that? And then if there is, do they have some skin in that game, or is it just they did their work and it is whatever it is?
So yeah, there's great question. So yes, the actual erosion rates were in the 500 tons and 500 pounds of phosphorus. And then with the project, you're making somewhat of an assumption on a percentage base of what it will achieve. And so it's based on the design and all that goes into it, that you make a determination off of what it's currently eroding. And by this project, we all agree that this, by installing it to what it was designed, it will then reduce it by that amount.
My point is, so like if the rock riffle and pools don't work and there is more erosion or there is more sediment ending up downstream, is that kind of like, oh well, or do they have some obligation that, okay, wait a minute, you need to, I don't know, increase the height of the rock riffle, or you need to dig the pool deeper or whatever? Do they have an obligation for that?
Gotcha. Yep. Good
Brian, give me
question.
one second here. I'm just gonna jump in with one analogy that could be helpful, because again, great questions. In a little ways, it's kind of like you get a roof estimate for a house, and you all agree that if you build this roof as designed, it will protect your house. And you know it's generally protecting your house if you're dry inside. I mean, that's what works for most people. With these kinds of projects, we don't necessarily know exactly the amount of sediment because we're not measuring it after the fact to know that the amount of sediment is literally being reduced by that amount because we're not collecting it at the bottom. However, much like if you get a hole in your roof, you know there's some failure somewhere. So if there is a structural failure within the project, that does go back and get corrected. So we can identify things like holes and specific point failures, but we're not actually measuring the quantity of sediment. We didn't capture it at the beginning. We didn't. So to that extent, it's a little bit of an assurance based upon the initial engineering. And what they are on the hook for would be things like a hole in your roof, something that's a point failure that you can go back to and correct.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
Yeah. And then the only other thing I would add is, because we addressed this earlier, but it was last year, so some of you weren't here. If there are any major changes that would affect the overall approved funding limit for this project, those actually do have to go back to board and do go with an RBA, and that goes into the board packet. So even though we do have a process for change orders to adjust for minor things or moderate things within the contract, if there was a proposed major change to the cost that would increase the cost above what board had approved because of the size of the project, it would actually have to go to board approval first. So they do have a limit that they can't exceed without board approval.
Yes, good points. Yeah, if we are going to exceed the approved amount, there's a process in place of what we need to follow, and that does include getting approval before doing the work.
Okay, any other questions for Ryan?
Thanks, Ryan.
If not,
It's a big project. Commissioner Barton, just thanks to staff. That's a big project to tackle, and yeah, it's a unique one. Those large ravines are not easy to work in.
No, thank you. Yeah, it's they're fun. They're challenging. Days when it was a high of like 1 degree, probably would rather be in the office, but there were some nice days out there too. So it's a fun project. They're all unique, and glad we're at this point of it.
Another thing to think about, J2, to maybe get at some of your questions. I mean, it's not like building bridges, with everything there might be a natural disaster, right? So you might have an earthquake that affects a bridge or a road, but these are natural systems, and there's just so many unknowns that you got to rely and build upon the previous data. So there's assumptions from the initial study that was done by somebody, and that led to the next step of design. And then the design is done by the consultant engineer. They're held to, design standards, and then they're responsible for the decisions that they have under their purview. And then that gets translated to the construction documents. So you can only hold, then it gets to the contractor who installs it. You can only hold the contractor to what the design and the engineer told them to build. So there's a shared responsibility on some level, depending on what the issue is with the contractor, the engineer, and also just us, the owners, the watershed being the owner of the project, and staff expertise. And then so it just depends on what the nature of whatever issue. There's probably not a one size fits all. If something might happen with the project down the road, you'd really have to try to figure out where in that chain of command and chain of decisions does the responsibility lie, and could you prove that one person failed, or is it just there's a level of unknown with these natural areas, and when you're dealing with water in general, that there's a lot of unpredictability built into it.
Yeah, completely understand that, and I obviously understand, it's like if the engineer says to build the wall this way and the person does and the wall falls over, that's on the engineer, not on the contractor. I totally get that. I guess I was just trying to understand, was there specific kind of goals, understanding all the variability that you talked about, that said, hey, we're trying to go from X to Y, and just understanding what responsibility does the engineering firm have it. You mentioned that there had been a previous attempt, I guess, to do something with it. I assume that engineer got paid, but obviously didn't, it didn't work. So how do you break that chain to where the engineering firm has some responsibility other than making a pretty design and cashing the check?
Then you might be getting into project lifespans. So is that it? Like
Totally understand. I'm just generalizing. So
no, yeah, but I think what you're referencing is that there was a previous thing that failed, which was an old wall, right?
Brian, you said something about a log wall that had been there, and I don't know if it failed because it was 25 years old or if it failed because it didn't work.
Yeah, and so that crib wall is like compared to the project we did, this might be exaggerating, but like a grain of salt on a beach, or a section of the beach. It was a very small project compared to what we just did. From talking to landowners, I don't exactly know how it failed, why it failed, but nonetheless, it failed. Whether it failed after its design lifetime, or due to circumstances that each project is designed to a certain threshold, and for us, we're responsible for 25 years of maintenance, so that's sort of our bare minimum. We need this to be designed at least to last 25 years, and so and they do that based on precipitation and all these other factors, runoff coefficients and volume, and lots of things that go into it. But yes, there are certain standards that need to be met. But once it gets built and constructed, and we all agree it was built according to the design, then we do kind of take over some of the responsibility of it. And, knock on wood, not a lot of our big capital projects have needed work. Some work has been done, nothing like huge where it's catastrophic, that a failure has happened where the whole project's not working. It might be like a little portion of it that could be touched up. And we'll hope our that continues with this project too, that we built it in a way that if we have to go all the way up to the top of the ravine, we'll find a way to do it, but that's not exactly what we want to be doing is going to fix those. And so it's important that before everything's kind of done and established, that we all agree that it was done according to our plans.
Okay, next would be program updates for Melissa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm actually going to share something here, but not going to talk about this quite yet. I need to give you some other information first. So sorry, let me reshare that. There we go. Okay, first I'm going to start off with a couple of the projects and then I'll get to this map here, but I thought I'd give you something to look at besides me. So my updates are the Aquatic Invasive Species Control Grant. The DNR offers this grant each year, and in November of 2024, I applied for that grant for 4 lakes, Cedar, McMahon, O'Dowd, and Thole. That grant would have helped pay for curly leaf pondweed treatments, which we do on all 4 of those lakes. We were recently informed by the DNR that none of our lakes that we requested were granted those grant funds. We have gotten grants in the past from that grant program, but this year we weren't so lucky. It is a random selection process that the DNR does to award those grants. I'm not quite exactly sure how they do it, but they say it's a random selection. So hopefully next year we'll get lucky again with that program. So last year we started a survey with the University of Minnesota, which we've done this survey a couple times now over the past years, once in 2011, once in 2018, and once in 2017, but we really directed that towards questions on our cost share program. But our plan, we had put in our plan to do it again before the next plan update. So I started that survey last year. We did 3 waves of mailings to 1,500 randomly selected landowners in the Scott WMO. And we've received about 390 surveys so far out of 1,500. So that response rate is about 27%. Kind of a bit on the low side. So we've decided to do 1 more last mailing, which I'll be getting out next week with some helpers. So the survey questions that we formulated this time are going to help us inform the watershed plan update. So I do expect to have results of that survey sometime late summer, and we'll bring those to you, and we'll talk about those results and how they might help us inform the watershed plan. My next update is about the map that I have up there. So our SWCD staff collected water quality samples for us throughout the entire Sand Creek watershed, which is the beige area on that map, for us in 2024. It was a very heavy lift, and we appreciate them very much. So I just put this map up to show you the scale of the work that they did for us. They monitored, so all the black locations are our core monitoring site. There's 12 of them. So they went to all of those sites bi-weekly, starting in, I believe it was May through September for sure. I think some samples were taken in October. And then all those green sites, there's 38 of them, are our what we call synoptic monitoring sites. So they go to them once a month. And the idea is to get to them all around the same time in the morning before the temperature starts heating up and the sun's out nice and bright. And those monthly sites, they're collecting just a little bit of data, but trying to get a snapshot in time on what's happening on different reaches of the stream, besides just what's happening at those black core monitoring sites. So at those black monitoring sites, they're taking a couple bottles of water samples, and there's a whole list of parameters that the lab was going to analyze those samples for. And so not only is it in Scott County, but there was a few sites here in Rice and LeSueur County to capture that upper watershed information. So with that, we've hired Bar Engineering to do the data analysis on this Sand Creek data for us, because it's just a lot of data and a lot of information. But this data will help us inform the plan update. So besides, taking all the parameters and doing the analysis and telling us if we're exceeding any state water quality standards, I've asked them to do a few other things with the data. So our current watershed plan expires on December 6th of 2026. And in that, we state that it currently includes long-term numerical water quality goals and short-term numerical water quality goals. The current interim and long-term goals for rivers is that they meet water quality standards and to continue to meet water quality standards in Minnesota Rule 7050, or the appropriate water quality condition for that region. So what I'm asking Bar after they analyze the data is, based on the results of the analysis, explain to us if that is still a reasonable goal, how we stated it in the plan. Secondly, if there's parameters that aren't meeting water quality standards, I want them to recommend strategies that are not included in our current watershed plan to be considered in this next plan. Strategies to help reduce those exceedances. And then also to explain how many times over the course of the next 10 years would they recommend a whole watershed water quality monitoring schedule. Because this is the first time in the last 8 years of the plan that we did this whole scale Sand Creek water quality monitoring. So I want to see what they come up with, if we should break it down into the smaller stream subwatersheds, or if it was beneficial to do it all at once like this, like we did. So, sorry, I'm going to stop sharing that, and unless you want me to put it back up because you have any questions. So the next topic would be the plan update, the phase 2 that we're planning. I recently had meetings with Marcia Barcelona O'Neill, who's our Scott County Community Outreach Specialist, and then Shelby Roberts, she's our Education Outreach Specialist with the Scott SWCD, to talk through ideas about phase 2. Our focus is on reaching the underrepresented or underheard communities in the WMO. And we aren't sure yet what information we want to collect from them, but we'll figure that out when we complete gaps analysis. That will be the next step after our technical assistance, technical advisory committee meeting, which will take place next month. And I'll talk a little bit about that on my next item. But so the target month for us to do phase 2 is June of this year. And so I'll let you know more of that as that planning progresses and we have a little bit more information on what we're going to do. And that's all I have for my updates at the moment. So I can stand for any questions if anybody has any.
Melissa, you said you're
Thank you,
asking
Melissa.
Commissioner
Go
Barton.
ahead, anybody.
Commissioner Barton. Melissa, you said you're asking BAR. Is that just as part of like the annual monitoring report? This is done every year. Is this a separate project that you're asking BAR to undertake with this larger scale analysis that's done? And if it's a separate project, how frequently is that done? And is that done on a regular basis, or this is just for the plan update?
So we don't, so in our current plan, I should probably show that. So we don't monitor every single monitoring station every year like some organizations do. We just decided early on not to spend a large part of our budget doing that. So we selected, in our plan, there was a schedule of what stream we were going to monitor that year. And so for 2023, we monitored all of Credit River, the whole Credit River watershed. And for 2024, we decided to do all of Sand Creek to inform the next plan. So each year, it's typically just one stream. And then we decided the way that we wrote it in the plan is that we would, a couple of years before the plan update, do this larger scale monitoring. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So we are open to ideas on a new strategy in this next plan. It's just that, you know, doing all this monitoring on this scale really takes you know, a large budget number, and we were trying to do more implementation than monitoring.
Sure. Great, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, next would be under new business results, draft priority issues for the 2027 watershed plan. Melissa?
Actually, I had one more item under ongoing business. I don't know if it was the watershed plan update. I just had a milestone sheet in the packet. I was just gonna quickly explain that.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So I just, each month I will update this sheet and then put it in the packet and, you know, maybe explain a couple little things, but if you could just scroll down a little bit, Ryan. So you'll see more boxes under 20 through 24 have been checked, that are complete, that we've done that issue prioritization exercise. And I apologize, line 26, I thought I had updated that date. We had intended to go to the county board in a workshop on February 18th. That's actually changed. We're going to the county board on March 18th now, to a regular board meeting with our prioritized issues. And so we are, if you can scroll down a little bit more to the next page, we have an upcoming meeting on March 12th, I believe, with the Technical Advisory Committee. That will be showing them the updated issue statements and then going over goal statements and having them do a needs assessment and an actual activity. And we would also like to do that with this commission as well. So we're hoping that the March meeting could be an in-person meeting to do that. I think that would be much easier to do. So.
Yep, and just a reminder, because the timing is so great. That's when we're hoping to do the joint WPC and SWCD board meeting. So.
And that's all I had for this update for now. Yeah. We can move on to new business.
And I think, Melissa, you can go ahead and just jump in.
Okay, sorry. So thank you very much for all of you that took the time to do the survey for the issue prioritization. While I was on vacation, Vanessa collected those from the WPC and did a similar ranking to them that we did with the Technical Advisory Committee responses. So what we did is kind of a weighted scoring to figure out which ones were really voted the highest. And then we took those higher ranked statements and I started filling them under what our current issue statements are in our current plan to see are the issues that are in our current plan still the issues, or do we have some that ranked high that aren't an issue and we need to create a new issue statement. So if you want to scroll more down to, okay, that's good. Oop. Okay, so then staff met last week and we talked about each issue statement. I showed them how things were falling under those, and we decided to go ahead and modify some of the statements. And that's what's in this memo, the modifications from the feedback that we received from that prioritization survey. As you can see, issue 1, we're recommending no changes. We feel that this is really an issue statement that's not going to change. It's, you know, it's based on, we have a geologic setting that's highly erosive. And, you know, it's just our setting and where we're located. And so that's, we feel that that's going to carry through, probably for many generations of plans. The second issue, we recommended no changes. We felt that, you know, agriculture is still very present in the county, and it will be for quite a long time. And so, you know, agriculture, along with many other things, has changed the landscape. So we didn't make any changes to that. Let me stop right there. Does anybody have any feedback or comments just on the first 2 statements?
I have specific and general. Commissioner Barton, I have specific and general comments. I'll just wait till the end.
Okay. As you can see, issue 3, we felt that that's still an issue, but then Vanessa recommended adding floodplain to that because she's working with a lot of different landowners and on floodplain things, so that needed to be inserted in there. Number 4, you know, surface water quality is impaired. We know we have a lot of impairments, and more have been added over the last 10 years to the, you know, federal impaired waters list. That'll probably continue to happen as long as PCA continues to monitor for different things and we find different things, but we just expanded that issue statement. Issue number 5, the portion that we did a strike through came from one of those U of M surveys that we did. I think it was the 2018 survey that we did with the U of M, is that we found that information came out of that survey. So we put it into the issue statement at the time, but now we don't believe that to be true. And I think Troy would probably agree that there are a lot of landowners who do implement conservation on their own, and that who also, you know, work with our SWCD to do conservation. So
Correct.
yeah. So we did add a few other things, you know, from some of the education and outreach comments that we received. So we just, you know, we're very general in the issue statement. We will get more detailed in the description of each issue statement, and that's coming next month. So issue 6, urban development and land use has altered the landscape, and additional development land use changes are expected. So we just added a few more words in there. And I don't know, Vanessa, if you want to speak to, because that was more Vanessa's.
This is one that you often see a lot of watershed agencies combine into just land use. However, the WMO is still unique in that it is largely divided in between heavily urban areas and then heavily agricultural areas. And we felt there was a lack of focus by combining them. And we really felt that the best work we do is by identifying the unique nature of both different land uses under their own issues. And again, that was also resonated by the comments that were received from the state agencies, the board, partners, WPC, TAC, etc. So.
Okay. Issue number 7, we did receive lots of comments about localized flooding issues throughout the WMO. So we decided to just shorten the issue statement that localized flooding issues are a concern, and we will address that in more detail in the description of that issue. And we struck out the rest of it. That keeps moving. Okay. We did take out issue number 8. We just felt that, yes, there are upstream portions of Sand Creek watershed. There are other plans now in place that do cover those areas that our SWCD is involved in. So we just didn't feel like it was needed to call that out. We will talk about that under other issue descriptions, but we felt we didn't need it as its own separate issue anymore. We recommended no changes to issue number 8 because we know that the cost of addressing all water resource issues is undetermined and is likely high. We don't feel that that's changed. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that one, Vanessa, or not.
No, 8, if you look at, so each of these issues within the plan gets a narrative below it that identifies specific subtopics. So this one tends to hearken to operational strategies that can be challenging, where we should prioritize our work as a WMO versus our partners, what we have the capacity to do based upon the size of the agency we are versus what we simply could not do with the unknowns in the cost of manufacturing and production, those kinds of things. So that's just kind of what issue 8 captures. And then, you know, the only other thing I might add is that they got a little bit renumbered because we crossed out the original number 8. So.
And actually 9, there is a modification to that. It's so that I think the underline is missing to that issue statement, but.
And issue 9 aligns with the county board strategy as well, so.
And then issue 10, we have the same issue statement in the current plan, and we felt that that still holds true. Now there are 3 new ones, and since you wrote these, Vanessa, I'll let you describe that.
So basically, when we took in all of the input from the state agencies, partners, WPC, TAC board, and looked at the data we have over the last 10 years, it became pretty clear that we have some issues that probably deserve to be broken out a little bit different. Now, in the end, we have 3 new issues, but we still actually, at the end of the day, went from 11 to 13, so it's not really that much. And overall, we really didn't change many of our issues that much. But one of them is that there is a rapid and increased shifting from historical uses of surface water resources in the WMO. New and evolving uses need to be incorporated into future watershed management. And this is across the board from, like, for example, during COVID, there was a significant amount of increased recreational uses on our lakes. There's an increased interest in using our creeks and rivers for other recreational uses, more fishing and interests like that we maybe haven't had in the past. A lot of those things that when we've managed the WMO's resources in the past, we've used a specific kind of set of resource uses that the residents have traditionally done, but now they are shifting. So it's good to incorporate those shifting uses to make sure that we're aligned with how people want to enjoy and use our water resources. And then the last thing that's combined under that one is, in fact, just that we know that there is a likely shifting in development, which could likely lead to abandonment of ditches, agricultural ditches in the next planning cycle, and quite a few of them. And so that would also really affect the work that we do. Issue 12 as
Vanessa,
go ahead.
Vanessa, it's Jay. So just I understand, that I'm sure that there's a goal to keep these kind of short, sweet bullets, but is there a reason why you didn't elaborate on that shifting from X to Y instead of just saying shifting? Because it's like, or how does someone get to what you gave as a little more commentary? Is there not a way to incorporate that in the bullet with maybe just a few more words?
Yep. So the issue statements themselves should be pretty clean and concise. That's generally what is requested of us from the Board of Water and Soil Resources. So we include those details in the narrative section. So if you look at our current plan, you'll notice the issue statement themselves, we try to keep pretty clean and simplified. And then the deeper, more specific details we add to the narrative section underneath it. But this is so that it's more clear to understand. I think if each of the issues became lengthy paragraphs themselves, it would be hard.
I'm not advocating for that, but if
Yeah,
I distill what I think you said, is
Mhm.
that the rapid and increasing shifting, it sounded like it's more from, I don't know what, agriculture to recreational. I mean, is 5 more words going to give you kind of the gist and then there's more detail later, or do you like it just being kind of a hanging statement?
Ah, I see. So in this case, this one is, I want to call it ever so slightly catch-all of a few different, very different things. Part of it is the likely potential of significant ditch abandonment in the next 10 years, and that's based upon land use. On the other side of the spectrum, how people are actually recreating in our waters has also changed. So it's hard to kind of put that into one descriptor. So they actually, that's why I didn't, because that would have been very lengthy.
I actually had that same thought. I would actually recommend pulling those apart because it does sound like recreation is one focus. And if ditches are a focus, I feel like we should call that out specifically in this issue statement. So, is there a possibility to, separate those, and maybe it's recreational use of surface water resources is changing, and then something more specific to ditches to make that clear that that's the actual issue that we will be solving.
I can, yes. I combined them to limit the number of issues, to make it so we didn't have a grocery list of issues. But adding one more issue by separating those two would certainly not have be detrimental. So certainly I can do that.
Sure. Or maybe it's, again, looking big picture, if ditching kind of gets lumped in with agriculture often. We do have, you kind of did this a little bit. Let's see here.
Yeah, in this case, it's more ditch abandonment. So because the ditch abandonment changes that resource to be more of a multifunctional ditch and puts it more in the purview of the WMO, or we will start to probably look at what types of like best management practices and capital improvements and the downstream impacts of that resource or of that resource change. I probably wouldn't attribute it specifically to agriculture. And the land area around them tend to shift a little bit to be more urban, which is generally what's leading to the ditch abandonment.
Okay.
It is a unique 10 years coming up with that shift.
Sure.
We probably won't see that one on every plan.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's my only hang up. Does it make more sense then when you talk about to lump it in with expected development increases then, issue number 6? Does that make more sense for something like ditch abandonment to fit under there?
Possibly. I will noodle on it.
Sure.
And adjust, definitely.
Yeah, we don't have many
because
issues.
both
So
of those are
possible.
possible. I'll go back and look at the comments too a little bit, and just see the bulk of sub comments, which way they kind of seem to lean a little bit more. All right, good questions. So, issue 12, this has been coming out a lot in the last 5 years. There's really a limited understanding of the local aquatic life and biodiversity and the impact that this has on our ecosystem health. In the past multiple plan cycles, we really haven't focused on the aquatic life and biodiversity, and it's becoming much more of an important priority for everybody. So it just to itself, it becomes its own kind of new issue. And until we have a better understanding of that aquatic life and biodiversity, we really don't understand the full ecosystem health. And then issue 13, this one is primarily more of an acknowledgement of the increasing impact extreme weather and climate change is having on local water resource management. However, because it influences pretty much every other issue on this list, moving forward, the issue itself will be addressed through the goals and priorities of those other issues. All right, and with that, Commissioner Barton and others, we stand for any questions.
I'll go first, sure. Number 2, just going in order here, back to the top. Wonder if it makes sense to add the landscape and drainage of the watershed has been significantly altered by agriculture. I just kind of like having the tie to water resources in all of these versus just saying general landscape. Drainage kind of just starts to get at the issue of water. I think the order of this kind of bigger scale question or comment, I think the order kind of matters. So, you know, I tend to think that when I look at all of these, issue number 4 would be my issue number 1. Just surface water quality, I feel like as a WMO, that's kind of our main charge. So I would move to say, take issue number 4 and put that back at the top as issue number 1. Same thing with 6, the landscape and drainage patterns. Urban development and land use has altered the landscape and drainage patterns. And I understand what you're saying about hard stop, additional development and land use changes is expected. I think I understand why you did that. Another thought though, I mean, if new development is proving to be like a pretty big issue, it may merit its own issue as well. Does that make sense? Versus just separating it with another sentence within that issue. So we'll leave that one up to you, but I could, given the nature of Scott County and what could be coming in the next, 10, 30, 40 years, maybe that merits its own issue. And then a couple like number 7 and number 9. I think I would prefer seeing just like maybe more of a more clear and active voice with these. So like number 7, localized flooding issues are a concern. It's a very broad statement. I would prefer if it said something like localize the issue. The issue is not that there is a concern. The issue is that localized flooding causes damage to infrastructure, roadways, buildings, or something like that. Does that make sense? We're making it sound like the concern is the issue versus what the actual concern is. Does that make sense?
Does.
So I prefer if it was
Quandary is that we have multiple concerns, which
Sure.
that gets added into the narrative section. So honestly, great minds must think alike. Did noodle on that one a lot as thinking, well, could we summarize it by saying, what are those specific localized flooding issues that are concerning to us? And it became a very long run-on sentence. And so that's where it kind of got, this is the title of the issue, and then the narrative section called them all out.
Sure. And
But I will look at it
there's some
again.
broader turns. Maybe once we see the narrative,
Yep.
that
will
will
look at
help
it
us
again.
inform what an alternative title could look at. But that's kind of my general comment, is just like more of an active voice and specifics, which again, you will have a narrative that talks about that. But like, for example, the other one I thought of was number 9. There is increasing concern over the quality and quantity of groundwater resources. So if I was to rewrite that with more like of an active voice, there is an increasing demand for use of groundwater resources and increased presence of pollutants in groundwater resources, something like that. Just more specific, right in the issue about like what's the problem versus the general concern title. And yeah, that's the other one. It is difficult to show the benefits of watershed-based improvements over the long term. I'm just wondering if there's a different way to word that, but I don't have a good example. Something just about how it almost stating that the opposite, stating the same thing in the opposite way is that, you know, an acknowledgement that it takes a long time to realize improvements, you know. So the problem is not that it's hard to show it. The problem is that it's actually just hard to do. It's hard to show improvements or it takes a long time to show improvements. Just another way. And before I get too far into semantics, those are my specific and general comments. Thank you for entertaining.
No, actually.
Oh, that's good feedback. Thank you. No.
Commissioner Barton, would you be willing to email those to me and Melissa?
Certainly. Yep.
We don't care. It doesn't have to be well written out. We don't need full sentences. Bullet points would be just wonderful if that's all right.
Yep, I will do that.
Thank you. I took good notes, but you never know. The only thing I probably would comment on at the moment is the one thing we'll probably leave. I mean, I'm happy to rearrange them in whatever order you want. Because that being said, from a planning perspective, from the way that we're doing our plan, and there are definitely many ways to do these plans that statute allows, we don't prioritize our issues. We just list them out as these are the issues that are known. Our goals should generally address the issues, but our goals and our priorities are then what we prioritize and focus on. We don't actually even necessarily commit to addressing all of these issues ourselves in our plan. We might state that somebody else will be addressing those issues, but we do recognize that it is an agreement that these are the issues. So to that end, I don't want to mislead you that I will happily rearrange them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that becomes a priority. That will come out in the goals and prioritization section.
Certainly. Yeah, that's just more of a mental mind game.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, so with that, that's really good feedback. Thank you so much. This is an action item. So we got some great feedback. We are meeting, staff is meeting next Wednesday to, I've set up kind of a standing watershed plan development meeting for staff to talk about different things. We'll talk about all these changes. But I guess we're looking for a recommendation.
Is there a timeline, Commissioner Barton? Is there a timeline that these would have to be modified for you to move on to the next step? Are you bringing these to the board for approval?
We are bringing these to the board on March 18th.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you're looking for a motion for a recommendation to proceed.
Yep.
Correct?
Yep. What you might consider entertaining is a motion to proceed with incorporation of comments as able. Because we won't have a chance to come back before a board.
One more clarifying question, Commissioner Barton. Do we have the ability to let these remain in draft form and let that be known to the board? So if that is possible, I'm seeing nods. My motion would be to make amendments to what's in the packet based on this conversation and then forward those, but that they remain in draft form until this board can review them again along with the further descriptions for final approval at a later date.
Yes, absolutely. And it is noted, we do note here and to the board that they are draft. They can be changed pretty much all the way up to plan approval. Obviously, it gets harder the further you get along in the plan to add issues, but it is also not unheard of.
On that
Absolutely.
note, Vanessa, I want to echo what you said. I don't want to go down a hole of prioritizing one or the other. For example, my neighbors out here, all they care about is groundwater. Surface water isn't. I mean, it's important, but that's their priority. So I don't want to prioritize. That being said, on that note, I want to Clayton Wagner. I want to second Joe's motion to approve in draft form.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Melissa, or Vanessa?
Absolutely, commissioners. I will do roll. Commissioner Schmidt,
Aye.
Commissioner Phillips,
Aye.
Commissioner Wagner,
Aye.
Commissioner Fredericks, and Commissioner Barton.
Aye.
Thank you, commissioners.
Okay, last thing is for Melissa on the 2024 watercraft inspection report.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chair, I just put together oh, sorry, I need to share my screen. I just put together a quick PowerPoint. This is what I do every year for this report, just to kind of highlight some things for you. And so I'll try to go through this quickly because I know that we're over time. So the inspectors ask a few questions of boaters that come to the access and want to launch at the access. And then they make some observations. So the report does list these. I just wanted to point them out. Some of the questions that they ask, and it takes about 3 minutes for the inspection itself for each person who wants to launch. So we had quite a few inspections that were completed this year. So the total number you can see from this chart. Cedar Lake East, which is the largest public access on Cedar, has typically been the busiest access for us over the several years that we've had waterfront restorations do watercraft inspections for us. So they started inspections on May 17th and then ended them on September 28th. So this is, I like this chart because it shows kind of a quick breakdown for you for each lake. Again, Cedar Lake East is our busiest access. And this is the number of hours that the inspectors worked at those accesses. And, you know, especially at Cedar East, you're doing a good number of inspections per hour. But I like to see the breakdown this way. I also ask them to do this because I really like to know when are the busiest weeks of the year. Typically in the past, the busiest week has been the week right before the 4th of July. This year it happened to be the 4th of July week. But this helps me to determine how many hours to schedule them. You know, and seeing the data, I know to, you know, have them reduce their hours towards the end of the season. And I also have them show me when are the busiest times of the season so that I know what time to schedule them. And you'll see Monday, Tuesday, Thursday was added on here. The DNR, surprisingly, had enough staff that they actually started sending some staff to some of these lakes. In past years, they've only been putting inspectors on the lakes that have zebra mussels on them. And fortunately, so far, our lakes don't in the WMO. So we did have waterfront restorations move inspectors to different days of the week to get more coverage. You can see the coverage or the inspections were really low during the week. They're typically very high on the weekends. Those are the busiest times. We did have an increase, I should say, in violations this year. So Minnesota law says when they show up at the access, they have to have the plug out so that they're not holding in any water in their boat. We had 28 plug violations this year in 2020, or I should say in 2024, which is an increase. I'll show you the next chart. And this is pretty typical. A lot of the violations also are people forget to remove plants that are either stuck to the trailer underneath or stuck somewhere in the boat or on the motor. But mud is a concern because mud can hide invasive species, especially zebra mussels.
And this is where I quickly plug, no pun intended, the importance of the aquatic invasive species funding, because that is what's paying for these inspections and those capturings of violations.
Yes. So I added this in here because I think I really like to see what's happened over the course of these inspections. you can see that, you know, we've had an increase in violations of plants. And, you know, the first year that we started doing this, there was a lot of plug violations and we did a lot of education and it really dropped, and now it's starting to increase again. So we need to figure out why that is. But I did talk with Shelby Roberts, and she is going to do some targeted or very specific outreach for this so that we can bring those violation numbers down in 2025, hopefully.
This is again a perfect example of, we know literally that these inspections prevented these aquatic invasive species from entering and leaving these lakes. It's not a what if, it's not a maybe it did, maybe it didn't. This is a literal on the ground proof of fact that that's what this funding did. So.
Yeah. And again, just to show you across the board over the years, you know, Cedar East, you know, we typically have, that's the busiest access. There's a lot of inspections that happen there. You know, it just kind of fluctuates from year to year. It was surprising to see Thole. There was a lot of inspections that occurred on Thole, and I didn't change the number of hours. So a lot of people were starting to use Thole Lake in 2024 again. One of the questions I ask is, what was the last water body that you visited? And we like to know that, to know, are they coming from a water body that is infested and trying to launch at another water body? And, you know, surprisingly, a lot of people are coming from Cedar Lake and going to another lake. But I like how they color code this to let us know that the answer that they give tells us that, you know, some people are coming from an infested lake and then trying to launch in our lakes. And so they just give a summary, and it's typically just, you know, the weekends are the busiest. Staffing was improved in 2024. You know, around COVID time, they had a hard time getting people to be inspectors. There just, you know, was a lot of uncertainty around that time. But for, you know, each year we get the same response, that a lot of the boaters thank the inspectors for being there and for, you know, doing these inspections to protect our lakes. So it's been, we've had really good feedback from boaters. I wanted to show you this. This is the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center created this model to determine what is the risk of other water bodies in our county for zebra mussel infestation. And so as you can see, because prior lakes have them, they've had them for years. Spring Lake was at a really high risk, and now Spring Lake does have zebra mussels. They were reported, I think, 2 years ago now, so they are infested. So Cedar Lake is, you know, a little bit up there from the rest of the lakes, but we did have a scare. I think it was 2 years ago. A watercraft inspector caught somebody who came to the access and who had zebra mussels on their watercraft. And so they didn't let them launch. They made them remove them, and then they could launch. So we almost got zebra mussels introduced into Cedar Lake. So these inspections are really important to us. They've protected our lakes more than once. And then I just broke this down quickly for you to show you that this is the DNR inspection hours in Scott County. And they did come to Cedar and O'Dowd, spent 80 hours on our lakes, which was really helpful. Hopefully in future years, they can continue to do that and maybe increase hours, but I just wanted to show you that they do spend a lot of time on Prior Lake, because Prior Lake has zebra mussels, and that's really the goal of the DNR, to do those inspections, to not let those zebra mussels spread to other lakes. And then really quickly, they do show us where there are other aquatic invasive species that we need to be aware of that are close by. So starry stonewort is another invasive species that's very very hard for watercraft to get through. It's very dense and very thick matting. And it is in Hennepin County right now, so they're just letting us know that it's close by, that we need to continue to be aware of that. And then another thing that's starting to move towards the Midwest, and is here in the Midwest, is hydrilla, which was actually aquatic plant that they use in aquariums. So it is starting to spread. I've read articles that, Florida State spends millions of dollars just trying to manage this. So unfortunately, it is spreading closer to us, and we want to be aware of that as well. And
I don't know if you could read the fine print, but the ideal breeding ground for mosquitoes is not something we need in Minnesota. So hydrilla would be very, very problematic.
so just to give you some numbers, we do get about just over 69,000 from the AIS prevention funds each year. I spend 40,000 just on watercraft inspections, and we give 27,000 to Prior Lake Spring Lake for them to do watercraft inspections and for them to do early detection surveys and some curly leaf treatments. So we spend all the money every year, and if that gets reduced in half, the half of the amount would be, I think I saw some numbers that were like 34,000 we would get. That's not even enough to cover the limited hours that $40,000 pays for watercraft inspections. I could actually use the whole 69,000 for watercraft inspections, but we need to share. So yeah, we're hoping that funding does not get cut in half.
So Melissa, I have several questions, but I'm also mindful of the time. So is that something that I should pursue offline, or do you want me to ask them now?
I'm happy with you asking them now.
So I guess my first question is, who's the audience for this report and for your summary? Who's the audience for it?
Well, we do post it online, so anybody can access this information and the data. So the general public and us, to help us plan from year to year.
Okay, but you don't have to submit this to, someone, to explain what you did with the money or things like that.
The DNR does ask if we could fill out a metrics form to know how we spent the money, but it's not required.
It's not this form, or it's not this report.
No, it's not. No, it's not required.
Okay. And is this the primary work product that, in a sense, addresses the aquatic invasive species work that we do?
Yes, this is where the majority of the limited funding that we get goes towards to protect our lakes that aren't infested.
Understood that, but is this report the primary work product that reports out on that, I guess?
The AIS plan, Melissa, as well.
Well, so let me connect the dots of where I'm going. So, and I knew nothing about the Governor Walz proposing until this call. But when I read this, and I think there was a draft of this maybe last time as well, and then this was a maybe more advanced draft. I saw it before someplace in something that I read. In maybe either a previous meeting or earlier in the year or something. But maybe it was a year ago. I don't know.
I might have stated that it's coming for this meeting, but this is the first time.
This is the second time I saw it. It was in some reading somewhere. So, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. So my sense is, again, back to the points I made earlier this evening, is, what is it that we're trying to achieve? Because if I understand correctly, what we're trying to achieve is, either preventing aquatic invasive species introduction, preventing the mechanisms that do that, mud, whatever, maybe improving that. I think deep in the report, there's like a probability slide that talks about the probability of infection going forward. And so I guess a goal would be to reduce those probabilities, over time. So to me, that's the outcome. The boating inspections and all that are just the means to the end. And the report as it's currently presented spends the vast majority of time, and I would say in way more granular detail than is necessary for maybe anybody except for you who's trying to manage the staffing and whatever, of cutting it 10 different ways. And you actually get really deep into the report, like 30 pages into it, before you start talking about the invasive species and the different types of contaminants and things like that. And so my sensibility would say the report should be focused on what the outcome is, the desired outcome is, and that should be at the front of the report. And then the how, which is the boating inspections and things like that, should be maybe even in an appendix of, okay, this is how we're actually accomplishing the what. Because on its own, the inspections are just a means to an end. And whether you do more of them or less of them, I get it. I totally get it. But what's important, so like if I'll play Tim Walls. If I came to Tim Walls and I said, okay, Vanessa, Ryan, Melissa, tell me why I shouldn't cut your money. And you would say, well, because then I can't do as many inspections. And then I would say, okay, so what? Why? Tell me why that matters. Well, I don't know that you kind of tell that story. You produce a whole lot of data, or this, waterfront restoration group presents a whole bunch of money, cutting it by day of week, time of day, where they've been, where they're going, all this other stuff. And I'm not saying that that's irrelevant, but it just is part of getting to what we really care about, which is, hey, we want to keep the invasive species out. We want to catch people that are bringing mud in on their boat. We want to do whatever. And so, again, I think a lot of the information is there. Just if I'm reading it, and I'm applying kind of what I would apply in business to this, it's out of order. You're telling me what you're doing. You're not telling me why you're doing it, and you're not telling me what the outcome of it is. You're just telling me about activity, and activity does not mean results. So I just think that I would swap some of the sequencing of it. Now, if this is some template and this is the template that has to be submitted to somebody, okay, well then ignore me. But if it's us trying to manage this and whatever, I would swap it around, focus on the outcomes that we're looking to achieve, the measurements and metrics that we're trying to make better. And the how is the how many inspections, days of weeks inspections, all that other stuff. Very important for you to manage it. I 100% understand that. But to me, we're mixing it in. And like I said, in some cases I just kind of, 30 slides in before we get to something, 50 slides in. The one that has the probability of future infection, which I think is important, is on slide 56 of 57. And no one, 99.99% of people are never going to read all the way to slide 56. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents, which you can do with it what you wish.
Okay, no, that's good feedback.
Let me jump in. So it is all great feedback. Let me pivot this ever so slightly by saying we probably misspoke. One of the largest purpose of us using this report or obtaining this report is actually for our subcontractor of waterfront restorations to actually report to us as to what they did during the year. So really the bulk of it is really that company telling us what they did and how they did it. And we do in fact use it heavily to plan for the next year. So we probably would not pay them to add to the results to our AIS program in this report, because that's not actually what we pay for them to do. However, with the definite validity of what you're bringing forward through our AAS program, because obviously this is a component of that larger program, it does have value for us as staff than to take that report that was published and given to us by Waterfront Restoration based upon their activities and incorporate that back into the program and say, what did this actually accomplish? That's great. You did that many inspections. It's great you caught that many different AIS violations. How does that affect our program? What did that actually mean? So my suggestion or my evaluation would probably mean for staff to go back and add that component to our actual program. It's what I'm thinking off the top of my head.
Sense, and again, that's why I asked who the audience was, and that's why I asked all those questions up front.
Yep.
And I'm not diminishing that value, but otherwise it seems like, you know, people that got a little carried away with Excel and PowerPoint and produced a whole lot of cuts of data that I'm not really sure add a ton of value to, again, anyone other than maybe you and Melissa.
Yep.
So I wouldn't put that in the report that you publish to, you know, a general audience, because again, to me, when I read it, it was like, okay, wow, they got a lot of time and energy to put into cutting the data all this way. And again, not even knowing that someone had proposed a funding cut, I would say, well, I know one place we could cut funding would be to stop producing reports that have, you know, 57 slides, of which, you know, maybe 5 or 10 of them actually have meaningful value in general. So again, just take that on. Again, I know not of what I speak, but that was my gut reaction to it.
No, those are very thoughtful comments, and again, I'll noodle on it, and I think I have a good plan moving forward. Because yes, again, we definitely need Waterfront Restoration to report on their activities, so we have numbers and data, but not necessarily every data document makes a good public report and should not necessarily be used as such. So a very likely more effective use of that report would just be for staff to actually apply it back to the program and publish that. So yeah, thank you.
If you can tie it to the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, I mean, obviously the ultimate outcome is no infestation, but if it's some of this other stuff, that's where I would focus, because that's, you know, one's just the means to an end. And if you basically say, hey, you know, here's what introduces these things, you know, here's how we catch it, therefore, you know, whatever, it just to me reads in a more logical way. I think all the information is there. I think it's just out of sequence.
Understood.
Hey, Brian, and if anyone wants to keep going, but I'm gonna throw it out there. I'm gonna motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
I only got 3 commissioners. So Commissioner Schmidt,
Aye.
Commissioner Wagner,
Aye.
Commissioner Fredericks.
I
Thanks, commissioners. I will say these first few meetings with new commissioners are definitely running longer. I will admit we have almost never actually gone over. So they will go shorter as time goes on. But this is all great conversation and great learning curves in the beginning. I will tweak agendas in the future to try to accommodate more and awesome conversation. I will absolutely admit I always get worried when we get new commissioners that we won't have enough interaction because they're too afraid to ask questions. So the fact that you ask a lot of great questions is wonderful, but I need to accommodate for that. So I apologize.